Hello, and welcome to our second session looking at Psalms of Lament in particular this time. I'm Reverend Beverly Jameson. I'm Rector of St Mary's in Lymm. I'm also Chaplain to the Royal British Legion in Lymm and Chair of Churches Together in Lymm. But it's lovely to be with you just to think about some biblical study, some selected and sometimes difficult texts, and their relevance for today. What was written millennia ago, does it still have a relevance to 21st century living? Well, this time we are going to look at how we as humans behave psychologically, and if that has a resonance, a link to the Psalms of Lament. So how do we behave when we face a situation that's difficult or painful, or tragedy hits, or anxiety hits, or a life-changing happening happens? We're made redundant. Someone we love is ill, or we are ill. We're concerned about some. We have financial problems. There's a whole raft of issues that affect us in the 21st century. And indeed, over the last 100 years or so, there have been many psychologists who try to make sense of how we as humans behave, because sometimes we just simply react. We don't know why we're reacting this way, we just do. And we don't plan to behave the way we do, we just act. So of all those psychologists, the one who is perhaps the most well known is a lady called Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She was a Swiss-American psychiatrist, and when she was doing some work in palliative care and looking after people who were dying within a medical situation, she realised there had been very little research on people's reactions to death and dying. So she began a major project interviewing and talking to a whole range of people who were facing death and dying situations, not only the individuals themselves, but their families too. And in 1969, she produced her book on death and dying. It's become well known and has formed the basis of many approaches to dealing with bereavement and grief and dying, and has influenced palliative care. She talks about a range of stages or areas that people go through or display when faced with such trauma, as follows. Beginning with denial, just refusing to accept this is happening to us, and if we ignore it, it'll go away. Anger, which can be displayed in different ways to different scenarios, to different people. How often do we take out our anger on the people closest to us? Bargaining, it's a kind of a trade-off. So when the relationship has finally ended, can we still be friends? In the hope that perhaps if we can still be friends, that relationship can improve. But then I suppose reality bites and depression sets in. In Kubler-Ross terms, it's also referred to as preparatory grieving, when realisation hits and we're just desperately unhappy and depressed. And finally, acceptance. We understand the situation is happening, and maybe it allows the person to move forward and deal with that situation. As Christians, we are no different. When trauma affects our lives, whether it be the loss of a job or an illness of someone we love, or our own illness, or just a new vicar trying to introduce a change into church, then we behave instinctively. And it's a similar pattern. This can't be happening to me, God. This can't be you. You wouldn't do this, would you? Why are you ignoring me? Why are you letting these people hurt me and doing nothing about it? If I go to church every Sunday, will you sort it out? I'm so miserable, God, you don't care. You're not doing anything. I'm alone. All right, God, I trust you. I trust you. In churches of praise and adoration and thanksgiving, It's very difficult to express feelings of bitterness and anger and resentment towards God, because as Christians we shouldn't be feeling that, should we? As Christians we should always adore and praise God and never actually challenge him for what he's doing or what is happening to us. If we had the courage to do that, how many of our dear friends and colleagues and brothers and sisters in Christ would accuse us of a lack of faith? But the psalmists, for millennia, as we discovered when we read those psalms last time we met, have been accusing God, shaking their fists at God, being angry with God, asking him, why is this happening? So perhaps understanding how we behave and the reactions we have when tragedy and trauma hits, and looking at the way the psalms are written and the psalmist's feelings are expressed, if we take those psalms at face value as their literary content, so we have some empathy for what that psalmist is feeling when they're feeling anger, could that help us when we go through trauma? Is there a correlation between the movement that is recognised in psychology and the movement in the Psalms of Lament? We looked at the typical elements contained within an individual Psalm of Lament: an address, a complaint, a request to improve the situation, an affirmation of trust in God, and praise of God. Brueggemann took this slightly differently and looked at Psalms of Lament in terms of complaint, petition, motivation, and restoration. And the easiest way to look at this in detail is to look at Psalm 13. The psalm begins by bewailing the absence of God and that others, enemies, have the upper hand. The tone and manner of the accusation seems to fix the blame on God. This could be interpreted as someone who's in denial or disbelief, but equally it could be argued that the psalmist is demanding and angry. The psalmist appears to be trying to attract God's attention. Look on me and sort it out. If God does not sort it out, the psalmist would die and the enemy would celebrate. Is this bargaining? Well, bargaining in Kubler-Ross and associated change management tools involve trading for the situation to change or improve. In a lament psalm, this trading is with God. The psalmist tries to persuade God of their cause. God is reminded of what happens if he fails to help. This could be seen as a confession of trust and a vow of praise, but it is also why God should intervene. There was a breakdown in the relationship with God, but now there is a memory of past trust and hope of future rescue. Both Kubler-Ross and associated change management tools, and most, but not all, of the lament psalms demonstrate a movement from distress to a promise of a happier future. In Kubler-Ross, this is acceptance, or alternatively, letting go of the past. For the psalmist, this is a turn from appealing to God to an assurance that God will act to save them. It's a deliberate turning to God, believing that he has heard, has mercy, and will respond. Importantly, this is not necessarily a change in physical circumstances, but a change in attitude and approach. Of course, not every psalm follows that neat little progression from anger and bitterness and complaint and petition to a restoration and a trust in God. If you've read the preparatory work, you'll know that Psalm 88 is unmitigated misery. Nothing but doom, gloom, despondency and moaning in that one. But even that has a purpose. Remember I said about Kubler-Ross that we don't fit into that neat cycle, that sometimes we get stuck in a certain stage. And maybe we're stuck in a stage of anger, or we're stuck in a stage of depression, and we can't formulate our words. So the Psalms provide us with words that we cannot find. And they also give us permission to actually say to God, why is this happening and I am angry? It's permission to rant at God. In those churches of adoration and praise and thanksgiving, where any hint of criticism of the Almighty is taken as a lack of faith, the Psalms tell us that no, The psalmist had a strong faith that allows them to say to God, why is this happening to me? Again, psychologically, if we try and hide and suppress our emotions, it just makes matters worse. And spiritually, if we try and hide and suppress what we really feel to God, we are damaging our relationship with him. God knows us. He knows what we're thinking. He knows what we're like. He knows when we're lying to him. Psychologically and spiritually, the best way to vent all of this is to be honest with God and to tell him how we're feeling. The psalmist gives us permission to do that, and they also give us the words when we cannot find the words ourselves. But let's go back to that movement, both in Kubler-Ross and the Psalms of Lament, because it gives us hope. It gives us hope that things can get better, even if circumstances do not change. There is a trust and a faith in God that emerges, that he will act, that he will put things right. We might not be now, we might not see it in the future, we might not be able to plan it, but God will act, and that trust is there. Spiritually, that's the huge benefit. I said earlier that people do behave as groups. We have peer pressures, we have team approaches, we have rules and regulations that stipulate how our group behaves. And of course there are communal Psalms of Lament. Their structure, however, is far more varied and different. And you can take Psalms of Lament, Psalm 80 for example, and you will find anger, and you will find distress, and you will find perhaps depression. But it's not quite so clear cut. Some of them have movement towards resolution, some don't. But I think perhaps the principle is still there. That as a group feels threatened or hurt, or change is being imposed upon them and they don't like it, the Psalm of Lament, a communal Psalm of Lament, can actually help that group collectively think through what's happening to them and to trust to God that all will be well. So in summary, linking the Psalms of Lament to the way that humans behave means that we create an empathy, we create an understanding, we create an emotional link between what the psalmist is saying and what we are feeling. Sometimes the psalmist provides us with the words we do not have. Secondly, it gives us permission to rant. It gives us permission to say to God what we are truly feeling. And if we are truly feeling that this is unfair, and why are you doing this to me, God, then we need to say that to him. Psychologically, it helps because it means we are venting suppressed emotions. Spiritually, it helps because we're being honest with God. In both cases, it stops such feelings festering and fermenting and making us ill. Thirdly, although not every Psalm of Lament has that movement from complaint and petition to restoration and trust, a lot do. And when we read those Psalms in the circumstances we find ourselves in, there is a degree of hope for the future that restoration will occur. It may not occur physically, circumstances may not change. It's our attitude that changes, our approach to life that changes, that helps us and makes us well. I hope you found that interesting and thought-provoking, and perhaps can see how maybe that the Psalms written all those thousands of years ago actually have a relevance to the 21st century world. Well, I look forward to seeing you at our Zoom meeting where we will be exploring this a little further. So keep safe, take care, and I'll see you soon.